All right, let's go from the good stuff now to the bad stuff. We go from yesteryear to yesterday. And boy, I wish I'd written yesterday. I'd be living off the residuals right now. I wouldn't be watching these programs. But anyway, did you catch the Rivals program this past Sunday? We talked about biography on your show, The Drive-Thru, but we skipped over the Rivals because I hadn't seen it yet.
Yeah, you made me watch it, and
Yeah.
thanks a lot.
Well, and before anybody says it, we're not going to knock Rey Mysterio nor Eddie Guerrero. But the program, I think part of the problem is, I know that the A&E has just become the WWE network now, taken over for the lack of network. By everything that they do is centered around the WWE in some way or another. But when they show a biography of a guy and then show him in Rivals the very same night, they're inevitably duplicating some of the story and some of the comments and or telling the same thing in some slightly different way or whatever. And sometimes it's a little much, especially on some of these short-term rivalries. But having said that, there was great footage in this. That's the one thing you've got with all of the A&E retrospective programs, is you get to see, footage of these guys when they were good and people gave a shit about the business. I don't know if I would. They prefaced this by saying they were the two biggest Latino stars of all time without any qualification of place. So I know they were going for of all time in modern times in the United States, but El Santo was calling, right? I mean, so.
Well, I think it was I think it was the Rey documentary that called El Santo. I forget who said it. They didn't know any better. They said he's one of the biggest stars in the history of Mexican wrestling. It's like, no, he's the single biggest star. Yeah. Period.
Well, and I mean, but now think about this. There is the case that Rey and Eddie are the two biggest Latino stars in American history on a national basis, because even though there were obviously, regional guys in the territory, the Torres brothers, or who was the Hispanic star in LA in the 40s, Vincent Lopez. I mean, there were, going back to the 40s, there were Hispanic stars in this country. And I would think that Gory Guerrero, who we actually got to see some footage on here, Gory Guerrero in Texas was bigger than Eddie or Rey would have been specifically in El Paso or West Texas or whatever. But for a mainstream, for a national consumption.
International consumption. If you really think about it.
Well, I guess, and international, because none of those guys would have been on broadcast on international television. So around the world, yes, but
except Mexico.
So anyway, we've shucked that all the way down to the cob. There's, like I said, there was some redundancy necessary to tell the story and make this a standalone program, because at some point this is going to air without being prefaced by the biography show, so they've got to do it, but it's a little redundant. I loved seeing Brian Hildebrand in so much of the WCW footage. That was fun. And again, you could see they made a big point about Rey innovating a lot of this stuff and Eddie being an innovator. And again, you could see that they worked as hard on the contest as they did on the flips. They were innovating shit that they believed that they could do in a pro wrestling match, in a wrestling context, that would look like offensive or defensive maneuvers, spectacular as they were, instead of just coming up with cool moves and cooperating to do them. And I think that's, again, what everybody's lost. And when we see any of the biographies or any of the Rivals documentaries or whatever, we make this comment that a lot of people took away from it. From Mick was bumps and hardcore, or from Rey was flips, or from whoever was whatever. And they didn't get into the fact that the reason why nobody had ever done that before and why most people shouldn't have done it afterwards is because it was special to that guy and what he could do. But nevertheless, Bischoff was buried again as the clueless putz who didn't understand the meaning of the mask to a luchador. You might as well say I got hired to drive an ice cream truck and I'd never tasted fucking ice cream. So they were best friends and partners.
If only there was someone Bischoff could have asked there. I don't know, like Mike Tenay or Conan or Rey Mysterio himself or
anybody
80 other luchadors.
Yeah. 80 other wrestlers. Anybody. Fuck. But then, as I said, they go to the WWE. We're not going to go as in-depth on this program because it was a short rivalry. They worked in WCW and they were best friends and partners. And then they went to WWE and Eddie switched heel. And about halfway in, they got to the who's the father angle, and Bruce again took credit, in quotation marks. I say blame. So I zoned out on that segment. I watched the highlights of the ladder match. And then, the last part of the show was Ray breaking up. And again, he still breaks up, talking about Eddie's death and everybody's reaction. And the story then that Ray went on to win the Royal Rumble and win WrestleMania in Eddie's honor. And that had just been told on the bio show, but it was told slightly differently. And then Ray visited Eddie's grave. And that's touching and poignant. But I said this about, and actually the people, the cult of Cornette did not hear last week's Rivals review. It wasn't long.
No, we ended up using it.
Did we use it?
We saved it, yeah.
There were audio issues that we thought might preclude that from being a part of it. But I said the same thing last week then. At least with the Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels Rivals episode, you knew that they really at the time really did fucking hate each other. Even if they've made up since then. And with a few of the other you could there was professional jealousy or there was a little one-upsmanship. You could kind of, okay. But with it was Edge and
Cena.
Edge and Cena. And then Eddie and Ray, I say it's like they're going overboard to hug and kiss their rival and talk about how it was all phony and that we always loved each other all along and we could have been family members and God, the love is in the air. Just Jesus Christ. It just takes the piss out of everything for me. So they're overly congratulatory to each other on the Rivals episodes. And then I just think of the other way to look at it. And the other way to look at it is that this shit from 20 and 30 years ago was so much more convincing and looked so much better and had people so much more excited than the rivalries today. And here are the participants coming out and say, yeah, we did it all to fucking give the people a show and it gaga and blah, blah. And we love each other. And here, come here and let me fondle you sexually or whatever. What do the people that are watching the current shows think about this shit? But they're trying to make people think that this current shit, that there's some edge to it, that there is really something going to happen. And it doesn't look as good as this shit did that we've just established by the admission of the people involved that it was all fucking set up. So now, the only thing that we can believe about wrestling these days is that somebody in the AEW locker room is going to get in a fucking fight and probably punch each other out, but it won't happen on camera because that's where they work. They just shoot in the locker room because they all hate each other. But otherwise, everything's phony. It just slaps you in the face with it over and over. What do you think about this program?
I didn't really like it. Again, I just kind of saw so much of this in the Rey Mysterio biography, and the story was told a lot better there. And even there, I don't like everything once they start doing the paternity angle. I didn't like it at the time. I thought it was, I don't even care about the bad tasting. It was just stupid. And you knew that it wasn't You just knew it was bullshit, like you said.
Yeah.
Didn't like it then, don't like it now, and then it gets very uncomfortable. You know, they talk a lot about Eddie. I mean, Eddie's the focus of the whole thing, obviously, but by the end of it, when they talk about his death and how he was discovered and everything, it's a heavy thing. So it starts off as one thing, these young, enthusiastic cruiserweights showing everyone in WCW what they could do, and at the end, it's just, it's quite sad. But I just saw the biography, so I was kind of sick of all this. I hate to say that, but I wasn't ready for another hour after those 2 hours.
That may have been the problem. It might have been better standing on its own, but when we'd just seen some of that ground plowed before, we knew no new corn was going to pop up an hour later.